Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for joining me here on the channel. If you're new, I'm truly grateful you've found your way here. What you're about to watch is one of the most chilling and emotionally devastating cases we've ever covered. This is not just a story of a crime. It's a story about silence, survival, and the dark corners of institutional failure. We will be unraveling the haunting case of Denise Huber's disappearance, a case that stayed cold for years and only got darker the deeper it was investigated. Before we begin, I want to emphasize that this episode contains extremely sensitive material. Please take a moment to review the following content warning. It was the kind of Southern California evening that invited windows down and music up. The warmth clung to the air just enough to remind you that the summer had begun its slow takeover. Laguna Beach had just hosted a packed weekend of art shows and music. The roads were still warm underfoot. And 23-year-old Denise Huber, freshly graduated, full of life, was heading home. She had just left a Morrissey concert in Inglewood. Friends remember her laughing in the parking lot, black boots scuffing against gravel, her cropped denim jacket catching the breeze. It was late, around midnight. She told her friend she'd be fine driving alone back to Newport Beach. It was a route she had taken dozens of times before, down the I-5, then the 91 freeway. She never made it home. The next morning, her parents, Dennis and Ione Huber, woke up to find their daughter's room still untouched from the day before. The bed was neatly made. Her work clothes for the next day still hung on the closet door. By 10 a.m., her father called the police. At first, they suggested waiting. "She's an adult," they said. "She probably stayed with a friend." But Dennis Huber knew better. Denise was responsible, cautious, and something was very, very wrong. By afternoon, authorities found her abandoned car on the shoulder of the 91 freeway near Corona. The driver's side door was locked. The keys were gone. Her purse was missing. But the tires were fine, the engine untouched. There were no signs of struggle. It was as if she had vanished, right out of her own life. What followed was a kind of slow, agonizing descent for her family. Ione's hands trembled as she posted missing person flyers. Dennis scoured the route Denise should have taken over and over, hoping for any sign. Helicopters combed the hills. Dogs tracked her scent as far as they could before it disappeared entirely. But days turned into weeks. Leads dried up. News stations picked up the story, and the Hubers went on television, pleading. "Please," Ione said, voice cracking, "just let her come home." But nothing came, and slowly people began to stop asking. By 1994, Denise's case was cold. Her file sat in a dusty cabinet in a Corona precinct, just another unsolved disappearance among hundreds. Until one phone call from Prescott, Arizona, changed everything. In a quiet, middle-class neighborhood, a local woman named Ruth Sorensen called a towing company to remove an abandoned Ryder rental truck that had been sitting on her new neighbor's driveway for months. The Arizona heat was unbearable, and the truck was beginning to smell. The tow truck driver, curious, cracked the lock. Inside, under layers of plastic wrap, sawdust, and trash bags, he found a deep freezer. It was sealed tight. When the police opened it, the stench hit first. Then they saw the frozen body of a young woman curled inside, arms locked in panic. Her skin is perfectly preserved by the deep cold. The ID found with her said it all. Denise Huber, the man who owned the house, the man who had driven that truck across state lines, was John Famalaro, 34 years old, a house painter by trade, quiet, kept to himself. Police searched his property and found more horrors. Blood-stained walls in a makeshift soundproof room, a cache of weapons, hundreds of photos of young women, some taken from behind bushes, some taken without knowledge, some far worse. But the one thing they never found was why Denise. At trial, the Hubers sat through every minute of testimony, every photo, every chilling detail of how Denise had likely been abducted on the side of the freeway, taken to a storage facility where she was assaulted and murdered, then frozen for years. The power in the courtroom shifted, not with the lawyers, not even with the judge, but with Ione Huber. She sat each day with Denise's photo in her lap, unmoving, unbreakable, Her presence forced the courtroom to see Denise not as a victim of circumstance, but as a person whose life demanded justice. When Famalaro was sentenced to death, the courtroom erupted in silence. No cheers, just tears. Justice was served, Dennis whispered, his voice breaking. But not peace. That's something we'll never get back. The real gut punch came later. Investigators learned that for months, Famalaro had driven around Southern California with the freezer in the back of the truck, sometimes parking it in plain sight at hardware stores, even at grocery lots. Thousands of people had walked past it, unaware that inside lay a frozen tomb. The killer was hiding in plain sight, and no one saw. 3 years had passed since John Famalaro was sentenced to death for the murder of Denise Huber. Her parents, Dennis and Ione, had done everything the court asked. They sat through testimony. They made statements. They had buried their daughter with trembling hands and unimaginable grief. They thought it was over. Then came the envelope. No return address. No markings, no postmarks. It had slipped quietly into the Huber family's mailbox like a utility bill. Inside was a handwritten note. 7 words. You found Denise, but not the others. Beneath it, a Polaroid. Blurry, faded, and old. A young blonde woman, maybe mid-20s, sat tied to a metal chair in a concrete room. Her face was swollen, mouth gagged with duct tape. Her eyes, those eyes, were pleading. Ione dropped the letter. Dennis didn't say a word. He just called the police. Detective Marta Delaney, a seasoned investigator who had once worked the tail end of the Huber case, was brought back in, a no-nonsense cop with steel-gray eyes and a quiet compassion. She took one look at the photo and said, "This isn't over." Forensics confirmed the Polaroid was real and undated. There were no digital fingerprints, no metadata. But there was one thing. On the back of the photo, in faint ink, the word Xenia, a name, or a location, maybe both. Delaney reopened the files on John Famalaro, this time with fresh eyes. What they knew: he worked as a house painter in Newport Beach, then moved to Arizona. He rented multiple storage units in California and Arizona. He was quiet, a loner. Neighbors said he was odd, but polite. He kept trophies, photos, and newspaper clippings, even locks of hair. But something didn't line up. He wasn't organized enough to be a long-term serial predator. He had a violent impulse, yes, but the freezer, the transport, the preservation of the body, those were systematic. Clean. That kind of meticulous behavior pointed to planning, to help, maybe even a partner. Following a cold trail of rental agreements, Delaney tracked down a defunct storage unit Famalaro had once leased under an alias in Santa Ana. It had been cleared after he stopped paying, but the site manager, a man named Calvin Truss, remembered something. "He came in with someone else that last time," Truss said. "Skinny guy, pale, real quiet. They had matching toolboxes. There were no names, no records, just a shadow. Then a break." A crime analyst cross-referenced the word Xenia and came up with a match. Not a name, but a location. A remote ghost town in San Bernardino County, Xenia, California. Once a mining settlement, now just a speck on the map. Population, 14. It was the kind of place where people go to disappear. Delaney secured a search warrant, and with 2 local deputies, drove into Xenia under cover of night. The town itself had no functioning gas station, no real police, just dirt roads, old cabins, and the scent of pine and rot. One abandoned cabin, near the base of a dried riverbed, had an outbuilding secured with rusted chains and a padlock. The lock was new. Inside that shed, behind boxes of tools and rotting lumber, they found a trapdoor. And below that, another freezer. This one wasn't running, but it was empty. Inside, though, they found blood, hair strands, duct tape, old Polaroids, dozens of them, some of the same woman from the first photo. Others too, different faces, different eyes, all scared, all taken against their will. At the bottom was a small envelope, a folded note, written in the same hand as before. "She's still alive. If you want to find her, you're looking in the wrong direction. Stop chasing ghosts. Start looking at cops." Delaney felt her blood run cold. That was the power shift. Until that moment, they were chasing a loner, a broken man. Now, they were looking at a potential cover-up. Why were storage units under fake names not investigated in 1991? Why had evidence from a previous report about a suspicious man in a truck never been followed up? And who had access to crime scene photos? Who could have taken Polaroids from sealed evidence files? Delaney pulled every report from the original Huber investigation. A name kept appearing: Officer Ray McCraw, retired now, lived in Riverside, served in the initial response team when Denise's car was found, made the call to have it towed, signed off on evidence logs. But there were gaps in chain of custody, notes missing, and Ray McCraw had never been interviewed again. Delaney drove to Riverside and knocked on McCraw's door. An old man answered, late 60s, polite, wore a faded, retired law enforcement baseball cap. She asked him questions. Friendly, casual. He offered her coffee. She declined. She asked about the Huber case. He claimed he barely remembered it. But when she pulled out the Polaroid of the woman, McCraw's hand twitched. Not much, but enough. I've never seen her, he said. Only Delaney never said who was in the photo. She left, but she left listening devices behind. Within the hour, he made a call. They're sniffing again. About the girl. No, not Huber, the other one. Yeah, Zania. 2 weeks later, the woman in the Polaroid was identified through a tip as Miranda Powell, a college student who had vanished in 1989 near San Bernardino. Her case had been ruled a runaway. No real search was ever made. But now they had a match, a timeline, and a real question. Had Famalaro been working under protection? Or worse, had someone in uniform been feeding him victims? The deeper Delaney dug, the darker it got. Miranda's file had been signed off by McCraw. Another missing girl, 1987, similar story, same jurisdiction. And a disturbing photo from the evidence locker, undated, but showed a uniformed man standing near a white pickup truck. Famalaro's truck. Delaney got the warrant. The team prepared the arrest. But the night before they moved in on McCraw, he disappeared. No trace, no digital footprint. His phone left in his home. But on his kitchen counter sat another photo. Another Polaroid. And this time, it wasn't just the woman. It was of her and Denise together sitting in the same basement, both alive. Behind them, a man partially visible in a mirror, holding a badge. Former Officer Ray McCraw was gone. Vanished. No activity on his accounts, no surveillance footage, no purchases, no withdrawals. But he didn't run because he was scared. He ran because he had time. He had planned for this. In the days that followed, Detective Marta Delaney and the cold case team combed through every document connected to McCraw, Famalaro, and the disappearance of Miranda Powell, the woman in the Polaroid with Denise Huber. A timeline emerged unofficially, buried under incomplete reports and altered logs. From 1987 to 1991, 5 women had gone missing along the 91 freeway corridor. Most cases were closed prematurely. Some are labeled as runaways. Others simply lost. The fingerprints of bureaucracy masked them, but a pattern now burned through the fog. Every case involved a call logged by Ray McCraw, and in at least 3 instances, John Famalaro was in the area working, painting, or renting equipment. It was more than a coincidence. It was a conspiracy. The final lead came from a woman named Angie Rios, who had once worked for Famalaro's short-lived painting company in the late 1980s. She called in after seeing the Polaroid on the news. "I saw that girl," she whispered over the phone. "Not Denise, the blonde one. She was in the back of the warehouse, crying, chained to a pipe." Delaney's heart thudded. "What warehouse?" "Outside Blythe, old citrus packing plant. They kept equipment there. And other things." The FBI joined the effort. A raid was planned for 3:45 a.m. on August 19, 1997. Stealth and speed. No news, no leaks. Delaney was on site as agents forced entry into the rotting plant. Inside was dust, broken glass, rats. But down a long concrete hallway, past rusted metal doors and rows of toppled crates, they found a hidden steel door, sealed, triple bolted. Inside was a single, windowless room, a mattress, a table, chains, a photograph nailed to the wall of Denise Huber, smiling at her college graduation. The room was empty, but something was left behind. In the VCR sat a tape labeled 7. Agents watched it in silence. It showed Miranda Powell alive, chained. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She didn't speak. And then the camera panned slightly. There he was, Ray McCraw, not in uniform, just a man, middle-aged, calm. "We're keeping her quiet," he said to someone off-screen. "Don't worry. If it gets hot, we move them again." Them, as in plural. A week later, a break. A highway patrolman recognized McCraw's old RV from a bolo. "Be on the lookout. Alert." It was parked behind an abandoned apple orchard in Tehachapi, California. Perimeter was formed. A slow, deliberate approach. Agents entered with shields drawn, weapons up. The farmhouse was quiet, unfinished, dusty. But in the root cellar beneath the barn, in the darkness, they found her, Miranda Powell, alive, barely. She weighed 90 pounds. Her skin bore years of scarring. But she was conscious, and when they asked if she was alone, she shook her head. Behind a false wall was another woman, unknown, emaciated, unconscious. Fingerprints identified her as Danielle Krieger, missing since 1990. Her case had been closed after a suicide note was found. The note, investigators later proved, had been forged. Danielle had been held for 7 years, and not a soul had been looking for her. They found him 3 hours later, crouched in a thicket of manzanita trees with a .45 in his lap and a bottle of whiskey beside him. He didn't fire. He didn't run. He just stared at Delaney and said, "You should have left it cold." When asked why he did it, McCraw gave no explanation. No remorse. Just a quiet, haunting reply. "Some men are born to hunt. Others are born to cover the blood." He was arrested without incident. The investigation spread like wildfire. It turned out McCraw wasn't alone. At least 3 former officers were indicted. One committed suicide before trial. Another fled to Mexico. 2 were proven to have falsified reports, destroyed evidence, and protected Famalaro, who they considered useful. One had even warned him when Delaney reopened the Huber case. They called themselves the Brotherhood. Not a cult, not quite a ring. Just men who believed some lives didn't matter, that they were the ones who got to choose. In March 1999, Miranda Powell testified in court against McCraw. Her voice cracked, but her words cut through like glass. "He told me the world had forgotten me, that I didn't exist anymore, but he was wrong. You remembered." The courtroom wept. Delaney sat in the back, silent, watching. McCraw was sentenced to life without parole. For the first time in a decade, Ione Huber sat in her daughter's old room, surrounded by sunlit pictures and silence. Denise was gone, but the truth, the full truth, had finally come to light. It wasn't just justice for her daughter. It was justice for all. What this case showed wasn't just the fragility of safety, but the illusion of normalcy. Denise didn't take a dark alley. She didn't ignore red flags. She went home the same route she always took. Evil didn't announce itself. It wore work boots and smiled politely across driveways. This case wasn't just about a killer. It was about how power protects itself. How systems can be built not to seek justice but to bury it. It took parents who refused to stop asking questions. A detective who broke every boundary. Survivors who held on for years in darkness. Took truth to burn it all down. But in the end, it was the silence that cracked.